In the heart of Montana's frozen mountains, a storm howls through the night, carrying a single sound that cuts through the wind, the desperate bark of a dog calling for help. A lone veteran, haunted by his past, steps out of his cabin and follows that cry into the blizzard, not knowing it will lead him to a wounded officer, a deadly secret, and a miracle that will change all their lives. As snow and darkness close in, faith, loyalty, and courage will be tested beyond measure. Where are you watching from tonight? Tell us in the comments below and stay till the end, because sometimes God's greatest rescue begins with the smallest sound in the storm. The storm came down the spine of Montana like an old hymn sung by a broken choir, low and relentless, turning the logging road into a ribbon of white noise and swallowing the town lights of Pine Valley until they were only rumors on the far side of the mountains. Luke Warren, who had once learned to count miles by the rhythm of helicopter blades and now measured his evenings by the pop and sigh of a wood stove, drove his dented off-road pickup through the drifts with the stubborn care of a man who had promised himself never to be surprised again. Luke was 39, broad-shouldered in a way that made most jackets look borrowed, with a wind-carved face, a brown beard kept short out of habit, and eyes the color of lake ice after a long winter. He moved like a soldier in low light, economical, quiet, a little haunted. The world had taught him to distrust easy explanations. Somewhere between Kandahar and the lonely years after he returned, he'd developed a reflex for restraint. People around Pine Valley, when they saw him at the feed store or the diner, called him Sir without meaning to. He responded with the flat courtesy of a man who didn't want to be a mystery, but had long ago accepted that anonymity was the closest thing to peace. His cabin stood in a crescent of old firs, the roof patched with tin, a porch that groaned when you looked at it, the kind of place that kept secrets because the wind kept talking. Tonight the wind was a scripture of its own, scouring the ridgeline, kicking powder into whirls that flashed in his headlights like startled ghosts. That was when he heard it, a bark so thin it was almost a thread, yanked by the storm until it trembled on the edge of silence. Luke's hands, large and steady, tightened on the wheel. The bark came again from the right, east slope, the old logging cut where the snow made a shallow bowl and the trees stooped like old men listening. He cut the engine, stepped into the cold that bit his teeth, and stood still long enough to let the night rearrange itself around him. Years of training rose like a tide. Map the sounds, smell the air, use your breath like a metronome. He slid a hand lamp from his coat pocket, checked the pistol at his hip, and began the slow, sideways walk he'd used in narrower corridors. Heel down, toe quiet, hips low. The bark sharpened into a pattern. 3 quick calls, a struggle, then quiet. Not panic, he thought. Persistence. The dog was fighting but pacing itself, like a runner in the last lap. That gave him a measure of the animal's mind before he saw it. And when he did, Luke felt something old and stiff in his chest give way. The German shepherd lay partly buried in wind-packed snow beside a fallen cedar, a flash of black and tan against the white, forepaws tied with nylon cord to a rusted stake hammered into the frozen ground. He was a big male in the prime of his life, 5, maybe 6 years old. Thick winter coat, blown up by the gale, ribs too. Prominent for comfort, ears pitched forward with the stubborn hope of working dogs. His name tag, half-iced, read Axel, and even in that misery he carried himself with a soldier's posture, spine straight as if the world was watching. The left foreleg trembled with the effort of bracing. The right showed abrasions where he'd fought the cord. There was fear in his eyes, but also an evaluating calm, the look of an animal who trusted his training and was taking inventory of the man who had come out of the snow. Axel's temperament was the kind that turns chaos into tasks, alert, loyal, problem-solving, the kind of dog you'd trust in a hallway full of smoke. "Easy, partner," Luke murmured, setting his lamp so the beam cut low across the scene, the way you light a clearing when you're not sure who else came. "I'm here." The dog's tail flicked once, a reluctant semaphore, acknowledged. Then Luke saw the second figure, and the cold sharpened into anger. A man lay half-hidden in the lee of the cedar, wrists wired behind him, ankles lashed, a black hood shoved roughly over his head. The snow had drifted up his side, insulating and threatening both. Luke slid a knife from his belt, knelt, and touched the man's neck with 2 fingers. Pulse, fast, thready, alive. He cut the hood and pulled it free. The face was gaunt under the gray stubble, early 40s maybe, with a strong cop's jaw turned slack by cold and pain. A purple welt marked the right temple. There were threads of dried blood under one ear. When the man's eyes cracked open, the first thing he did was look for the dog. "Axel," he whispered, a word barely heavier than breath, and the dog answered with a hoarse, relieved grunt, the body language of a friend who had been holding the line and was now allowed to stand down. "I've got him," Luke said, and the man tried to nod, which cost him. "David Hale," Luke added, reading the badge wallet dumped nearby, the shield scuffed and rimmed with frost. "Officer, Pine Valley PD." David Hale, even broken and half frozen, wore the kind of honesty that wasn't performative, a face used to long shifts and unglamorous calls, the quiet of a man who listens more than he talks. The lines etched into the corners of his eyes suggested someone who laughed easily but hadn't lately. There was that particular steadiness in his features, the exasperated tenderness cops sometimes carry after too many domestic disputes and not enough miracles. He looked strong in the way you become strong by pushing back at the same door until it opens. Now that door had swung hard the other way. Luke cut the ankle bindings, rolled David onto his side to free his hands, then gave Axel a moment, just one, to nose his handler's cheek. The dog did it with a restraint that nearly broke Luke, a single lick and a soft chuff as if to say, "You are here, stay here." "You with me?" Luke asked. David's voice had the gravel of cold in it. "You, Luke Warren?" That made Luke blink. "How?" "Dispatch board," David murmured, fighting to hold on to the ledge of consciousness. "Plate red on your truck, folks talk. You help people." Luke almost laughed. The sound came out like a cough. "Contrary to rumor." Axel pulled against the cord again, not frantic now, but determined, and Luke turned his knife to the knot, working without hurrying, because hands that hurry cut wrong. Nylon gave, the stake wobbled, and then Axel was free. He didn't bolt. He stepped forward and leaned his shoulder into Luke's thigh in a wordless thank you, then went rigid, nose lifting. Luke smelled it a heartbeat later, the sour curl of burnt propellant, new in the air. "We're leaving," Luke said, and the night agreed with a gust that shoved them all toward the trees. He pushed his wool cap lower, hauled David to his feet, discovered with a medic's hands what the snow had hidden. A rib likely cracked, a concussion, wrists bruised from the wire, and a gash at the hairline that needed light and soap and stitches. David's uniform had been stripped down to thermal layers, his vest tossed aside. Somebody had made a point of humiliation. Axel recognized the shift from triage to movement and slid to David's blind side, bracing against his leg with the gentle pressure of a partner who has learned how to be a cane. They began the slow labor of crossing the drifted cut, Luke taking most of David's weight, the dog reading their tempo and setting it. The storm did its feral best to erase them. It filled their footprints as they made them and whispered lies in the firs so convincingly that Luke almost turned to answer. He counted his breath, matched it to David's, cataloged the terrain in a marching mental script. Down 2 feet, route at 11 o'clock, truck 40 yards, tires angled to the south line, radio off. Axel halted without warning, ears high. Luke froze with him. That was when he saw the note. It had been nailed to the cedar trunk at eye level under a strip of bark, the paper slicked with freezing moisture until it had a sheen like fish scales. The wind tugged it, and each tug made the nail squeal in a small, mean way. Luke's lamp found the words printed in block capitals with a marker that had bled at the edges. "Traitors die in silence." The plural snagged his attention like a thorn. Luke filed the dread with the other things he could not afford to feel yet, reached up and tore the paper free. He folded it with unnecessary neatness, a habit he had for handling ugly things, and pocketed it. "Message received," he said to no one in particular, and the storm hissed back as if in laughter. The last stretch to the truck turned into a slow, ridiculous comedy that would have been funny if it hadn't been so cold. David tried to help by steering himself, which only made him list like a sailor on bad legs. Axel insisted on taking a clumsy loop around a bush because some rule in. His dog brain demanded he check the leeward side. Luke discovered for the 100th time that swearing at snow does nothing to snow except make it feel superior. When they reached the truck, he manhandled David into the passenger seat, shoved a blanket over him, and used a field kit from behind the bench seat to bind the scalp wound in a way that would make a proper nurse sigh and take over later. Axel heaved himself into the narrow back, then immediately leaned between the seats, pressing his muzzle to David's shoulder, close enough for the man to feel the warmth and the heartbeat that had kept company with him in darkness. "Good boy," David whispered. He sounded like a child peering out from under a table after the thunder. "Best boy," Luke agreed, and put the truck in gear. The road back wound along a ridge where the storm had carved art out of cruelty. Wind-sculpted cornices, glittering veils hurled across the headlights, black trees waving their arms like warning saints. Twice Luke had to stop, once for a fallen branch, and once because he sensed what his eyes could not yet see, a drift that faked shallowness and would swallow a front axle whole. Both times Axel's ears did the mental arithmetic faster, and his low growl said, "Turn now." Luke obeyed. He didn't often trust without verification. The dog's competence made trust feel less like a luxury and more like a plan. By the time the cabin shouldered up out of the storm, the roofline a familiar scribble, the worst edge of the wind had dropped, replaced by the steady, exhausted fall of real snow, thick flakes that seemed to apologize for their violent cousins. Luke nose-parked the truck to block the door from the prevailing gusts, cut the engine, and listened to the world hold its breath. No engine sounds chased them, no second set of lights. He wanted to believe that meant safety. Experience translated it as a countdown. Inside, the cabin gave them its old, homely welcome. Dry air, the lingering resin smell of split fur, the stove ticking with residual heat. Luke moved fast without fuss. He put water on, tossed 3 chunks of seasoned wood into the stove, laid out towels and a first aid roll on the kitchen table that had learned to be an operating surface when necessary. He stripped David's outer layers, muttering the polite apologies of a stoic man handling another stoic man. Checked pupils, checked abdomen, pressed ribs. David tried for a joke and got halfway there. "On a scale of 1 to train wreck," he rasped, "how am I?" "You're not the train," Luke said. "You're the rail it jumped." Axel circled once at the hearth and lay with the kind of sigh that ends a chapter. Up close and in good light, he was more himself. A working crown of head too intelligent for comfort, those sober eyes that move handlers to tell strangers stories in grocery lines. Scars, a faint crescent under the left ear, an old puncture on the thigh, the map of the life he'd chosen or that had chosen him. He watched every move Luke made, not suspiciously, but with union interest, as if taking notes for later. This is how you wrap a bandage. This is how you heat water so it doesn't scald. This is how you pull a friend back from an edge by talking like the room is already safe. When Luke finally let himself sit, it was only for a second. He used the second to read the badge again, to memorize the name the world had tried to delete, to feel that old ache of recognition. Men who stand where they should not, because someone had to. He set the folded note on the table beside a chipped mug, as if it were a guest who required supervision. Outside, the storm, like an audience that had stayed too long, began to file away. It left behind a hush that wasn't peace yet, but was at least a pause. Luke drew the blackout curtain across the small window, clicked off the porch light, and turned the radio on long enough to taste the airwaves, static like gravel, a hint of a voice lost under the hills. He turned it off. He would not be leaving the door open for the wrong ears. "You're safe," he told the room, "because sometimes you have to say it to start making it true." Axel's head lifted and then sank again, satisfied. David's breath evened. Luke sat with his back against the wall where he could see both doors, his pistol on the table, and the storm's last whispers quitting the eaves like regret. He did not pray out loud. He believed God heard the things you place between sentences. But as he watched the 2 lives he'd pulled out of the snow settle into the fragile arithmetic of survival, he felt the familiar nudge in his chest, the sense that the world, even at its worst, is crowded with ways to begin again. The note on the table looked small and theatrical now. He let it be. The night deepened into something almost tender. Axel's paws twitched once in a dream, some hallway, some command. David murmured a word Luke didn't catch and then went quiet. When the stove finally found its steady hum, the storm finished its sermon, drew the door closed behind it, and left them to the kind of silence that saves. And in that silence, Luke Warren sat his watch, exactly as the chapter of his new life required. A soldier turned neighbor, a guard dog turned anchor, a cabin turned sanctuary. The mountain breathed, the snow forgot its anger, the dark did not press closer. For now, it stayed where it belonged, outside. The snow had quieted but not surrendered. It drifted lazily past the cabin windows like ash from a slow-burning fire. Morning came without color, a pale gray smear over Pine Valley, the kind of dawn that makes you question whether the sun had simply given up. Inside, Luke Warren sat at the table with a mug of black coffee that steamed like a small miracle. The world outside was still thawing from the storm, but in here, the silence was human, broken only by the crackle of the stove and the low whimper of Axel dreaming near the fire. David Hale stirred on the cot Luke had set up in the corner. His color had returned, a weary tan instead of the waxen gray of the night before, but his body moved like an old hinge. He blinked once, saw the ceiling, then the shape of Luke sitting by the table. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by confusion. Where? His voice rasped like gravel. Luke turned slightly, his face half-shadowed. You're in my cabin, Timber Ridge, about 10 miles north of Pine Valley. You've been out a day and a night. David tried to push himself up, winced, and fell back. You found us? Your dog found me first, Luke said, nodding toward Axel, who lifted his head, tail thumping softly at the sound of his name. The dog's right paw was bandaged, but his eyes shone with that fierce, unshakable devotion that only working dogs carried. You've got yourself a partner with more sense than most people. He's been through worse, David murmured, scratching Axel's head. So have you, I'm guessing. Luke didn't answer that. The silence stretched, comfortable at first, then edged with questions neither man was ready to ask. David's gaze drifted to the folded note pinned under a mug on the table. The words, "Traitors die in silence," glared through the paper like bruises. They left that? Luke said quietly. In the snow. David's throat tightened. Then they know I'm still alive. He took a shallow breath. They'll come. Let them, Luke replied. We'll be ready. He said it like a fact, not a threat. But before either could add another word, a knock rattled the door, sharp, urgent, deliberate. Luke's hand went to the pistol on the table. Axel rose, hackles lifting. David's pulse quickened. It's okay, came a voice from outside, slightly muffled but clear, female, steady. I'm not armed. Luke motioned Axel to stay, then opened the door just a crack. The wind pushed in, carrying flakes of fresh snow and the smell of pine. On the porch stood a woman in her early 30s, wrapped in a thick ranger's jacket, cheeks flushed red from the cold. Her hair, a dark auburn tied loosely at the back, was crusted with frost. She had the bearing of someone who belonged to the wilderness, upright, alert, and quietly determined. Name's Evelyn Moore, she said, flashing a laminated badge. Volunteer ranger with Pine Valley Forest Watch. We picked up a weak distress signal on an old emergency frequency. Traced it here. Luke studied her eyes, hazel, cautious but kind. He could tell she wasn't lying. She looked like someone used to speaking softly to frightened animals and harder truths to frightened men. Signal came from him? She asked, nodding toward the cot. Yeah, Luke said. He's a police officer, David Hale. Her expression changed, recognition mixed with alarm. There's a manhunt out for him. Rumor says he went rogue, killed a federal informant, and disappeared into the woods. Luke's jaw tightened. You believe that? Evelyn met his gaze evenly. I believe most rumors are told by the people they protect. She stepped inside when Luke moved aside. He needs real medical care. He's not going to a hospital, Luke said flatly. That'd be suicide. David forced himself to sit up, pain cutting through his ribs. She's right about the danger. I was framed. They're using my name to cover their trail. Evelyn knelt by the cot, checking the bandages Luke had wrapped. Her touch was practiced, careful, and unafraid. Who's they? She asked. David looked past her toward the fire. The Black Talons, gun runners. I was tracing shipments moving through Pine Valley, illegal weapons smuggled under forestry cargo. Someone inside the department was helping them. I got close, too close. They caught me, tried to make me talk. And when you didn't? Luke asked. David's eyes darkened. They wanted to make an example. Axel pressed his head against David's knee, a silent anchor. Evelyn sat back on her heels. There have been strange things in the forest lately, she said. Unmarked trucks moving through the service roads at night. No headlights, heavy loads. Locals report hearing engines but never seeing the drivers. Luke frowned. How many? Too many, and lately the same pattern, heading toward the abandoned rail depot at Pine Valley. Luke rubbed his temple, the puzzle forming in his mind like a slow frost. So, that's their hub. Probably, David said. And if I don't finish what I started, they'll keep using it. They'll move more weapons, maybe people next time. You're not in shape to chase anyone, Luke said. Neither are you, David shot back. Luke smirked. Difference is, I don't need to. Evelyn looked between them. What do you mean? We make them come to us, Luke said. Whoever planted that note thinks we're buried. Let's keep it that way. The fire cracked, punctuating his words. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Evelyn rose, pacing slowly, her boots creaking against the wood floor. If they're moving tonight, we won't have much time. The storm slowed the roads, but when it clears, they'll come looking. We'll need supplies, Luke said. Fuel, batteries, maybe extra bandages. There's an old Ranger. Outpost half a mile east. You think it's still stocked? Evelyn nodded. Mostly emergency gear. I can get there before dark. Luke looked at her, the way a man looks at someone volunteering to walk into danger. You sure about that? I didn't come out here to count trees, she said. Her tone was light, but her eyes carried something heavier. A quiet defiance born of loss. He didn't ask, but later he would learn she'd once been married to a rescue pilot who never made it home after a wildfire. Since then, Evelyn had stayed close to the woods, as if saving others might one day save herself. Fine, Luke said. Be careful. You too. She paused at the door. And Luke? That radio signal I picked up, it was faint, but it repeated twice, like someone triggered it on purpose. Could be they were trying to lure rescuers. Luke's stomach tightened. Then they already know where to look. She gave a grim nod and slipped into the snow, her figure fading into the white until only the dark outline of the trees swallowed her. Inside, Luke moved to the window, watching the storm clouds drag their shadows across the ridge. David lay back again, exhaustion claiming him, and Axel settled close, protective. The cabin, for all its warmth, felt smaller now, like the walls were listening. Luke turned the radio on low, tuning through static until he caught a flicker of coded beeps, faint but deliberate. He recognized the pattern: military SOS, shortened intervals, cut mid-signal. They're probing, he muttered. Axel's ears twitched. David opened one eye. How long before they find us? Luke watched the snow swirl. Depends on whether they want us dead or useful. He clicked the radio off again and stared at the dying fire. Either way, we're not waiting. He checked his rifle, laid spare rounds on the table, then rewrapped David's bandage tighter. Outside, the wind shifted direction, bringing the smell of smoke from somewhere too far to see but close enough to feel. It wasn't chimney smoke, it was gasoline. They've started burning evidence, David said quietly. No, Luke corrected, his voice turning to steel. They're burning a path. When Evelyn returned hours later, her jacket rimed with frost and her hands trembling from cold, she carried more than supplies. In her pocket was a spent cartridge case and a scrap of map torn from a logbook. Coordinates marked with a red X near Pine Valley's old rail yard. She laid it on the table, eyes grave. They're moving again, she said, and they're not hiding anymore. The three of them stood over the map as the storm built again outside. No longer a blizzard, but the steady breath of something alive and watching. Axel growled low, a warning buried deep in his chest. Luke met David's eyes. Then the hunt starts here. Iahno reclaimed the mountains with quiet authority, covering the evidence of every footprint and lie. By the time the third morning broke, Pine Valley was swallowed again by white, a stillness too deliberate to trust. Inside Luke's cabin, the stove hummed, the kind of steady sound that people mistake for peace. But Luke Warren, who had lived long enough to read the language of silence, felt the shift beneath it, a tension like the moment before a fuse catches flame. David Hale sat by the window, his face pale beneath a rough stubble, the bruises on his neck now fading to the color of smoke. He had insisted on sitting upright, wearing a borrowed flannel shirt that hung loose on his frame. There was something restless in him, the posture of a man who had lived his life giving orders, but was now trapped waiting for someone else's mercy. He kept one hand on Axel's head as if drawing steadiness from the dog's warmth. Axel, still favoring his right paw, sat alert beside him, eyes fixed on the window, as if guarding against the horizon itself. His fur had regained a faint sheen, a soft ripple of tan and black that caught the morning light like polished oak. The air around him carried a low hum of readiness, the kind that soldiers and dogs share when they know danger hasn't gone, only crouched lower. Luke moved with quiet efficiency, tightening bolts on the cabin's shutters, checking his rifle for the fourth time. He wore his fatigue like a second uniform, clean, disciplined, revealing nothing. When he spoke, it was mostly to himself. If they tracked you once, they can do it again. They will, David said, eyes still on the window. The black talons don't leave loose ends. They think in units and objectives, not people. They'll send a sweep team, maybe 4, maybe 6. They'll look for heat signatures, tire tracks, anything out of place. Luke gave a humorless chuckle. In this weather, everything's out of place. From the other side of the cabin, Evelyn Moore stirred the stew pot hanging over the fire. The light of the flames touched her hair, turning the auburn to a deep bronze. Her face was the sort that carried both strength and fatigue without complaint. Slender jaw, small scar under the chin from some long-ago accident she never mentioned. She had the kind of focus that made silence feel useful. "I made another sweep before dawn," she said, not turning. "Saw tire imprints near the creek bend. Fresh ones, 2 sets, wide, military-grade treads. Whoever's driving isn't lost." Luke looked up sharply. "You sure?" "I've tracked elk through this valley since I was 16, Evelyn said. "I know when something doesn't belong." She ladled the stew into tin bowls, set them on the table. "Eat while it's warm. Thinking's no good on an empty stomach." They ate in the thick quiet of people who understood the importance of calm. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing snow off the roof like the sweep of a giant hand. Then came the sound, a low, distant rumble that didn't belong to weather. David was the first to recognize it. Engines, 2, maybe 3. Luke went to the window. Down in the hollow, through the screen of trees, faint headlights flickered, a convoy winding through the forest road. "Guess your friends found us?" Luke said grimly. "Guess so," David replied. Evelyn grabbed her rifle, slinging it across her back. "What do we do?" Luke's eyes narrowed. "We move before they do. The snow's our cover. We've got the ridge, they've got the road. That gives us time." But Axel growled then, deep from the chest. His eyes were fixed not on the road, but the tree line behind the cabin. Luke froze. "They flanked us." Before he finished speaking, the first shot cracked. The sound shattered the still air, followed by the hiss of splintering wood as a bullet chewed through the doorframe. Evelyn ducked, grabbing David's arm and pulling him to the floor. Luke rolled behind the table, returning a quick burst of cover fire through the window. Axel barked, a sharp, commanding sound, and stayed low beside David. "2 on the left slope, 1 on the ridge," Luke shouted. "They're testing our defense." David crawled to the corner, pulling his pistol from the holster Luke had set near his cot. "They're not testing, they're surrounding." "Then we'll remind them what a cornered wolf can do," Luke muttered, loading another clip. The gunfire roared for a minute, then stopped as suddenly as it began. Silence. Snow drifted again. Evelyn's breathing came fast. "You think they're gone?" Luke shook his head. "No, they're waiting. They want us to panic." From outside came a voice, distorted, amplified through a radio speaker, male, steady, taunting. "Sergeant Warren, Officer Hale, you've had your rest. Hand over the evidence and maybe you walk out." David's jaw clenched. "They know your name now." Luke stared at the door, his expression unreadable. "Means they did their homework." He called back, voice calm as winter stone. "You came a long way for nothing. There's no evidence here." The voice laughed, a dry sound swallowed by static. "We'll see." Then came the faint metallic click of something settling into place. Evelyn's eyes widened. "Trip charges. They're setting mines." Luke grabbed his coat. "We're leaving, now." He threw open the back hatch that led into the trees. The cold bit like a warning as they stepped into the snow. David limped, but kept pace, Axel pressing against his leg for balance. Evelyn followed, scanning the path with her rifle raised. They moved uphill toward the ridge, breath visible, every step whispering through powder. Behind them, the cabin stood still, then erupted in a burst of orange and sound. The blast rolled through the valley, shaking snow off branches like rain. They dove into the snow, the shock wave washing over them. When the echo faded, Luke turned to look back. The cabin, a life he had built to forget, was gone, replaced by smoke and falling ash. For a moment, his face betrayed nothing. Then his jaw set, a soldier reclaiming purpose. David coughed, spitting black soot. "That's it then. They'll think we're dead." Luke nodded slowly. "Let's not disappoint them too soon." They pushed higher up the ridge, weaving between pines heavy with snow. The temperature dropped, breath freezing on their collars. Above them, dawn struggled through clouds, painting the peaks in thin light. After half an hour, Evelyn stopped, pointing toward a clearing below. "There! See that?" Luke followed her gaze. A line of trucks stood half hidden near a frozen stream. Men in dark coats moved crates from one to another, efficient and wordless. The insignia on the crates gleamed faintly. Serial numbers, military-grade markings. "That's your black talons," Luke said. David exhaled, his voice tight with fury. "They're moving shipments again." Evelyn adjusted her scope. "And that man directing them? I've seen him before. Highway checkpoint last fall. Uniform, badge, everything." Luke looked through the scope and felt his stomach turn. "Richard Cole," David whispered before Luke could speak. "My commanding officer. I trusted him." Luke lowered the scope, expression hard. "That's the man who left you to die." David nodded. "And the one I'm going to stop." Snow began to fall again, light but relentless. Below, Cole barked orders while his men loaded the last crate. The scene was mechanical, almost clinical, evil made efficient. Luke watched for a long moment, calculating distances, exits, possibilities. "They've got too many men, too much ground," he said finally. "We need to regroup. We'll take them another night." But Axel's growl interrupted. The dog's head jerked, nostrils flaring. He stared downhill toward a small rise near the trucks. Then, before any of them could stop him, he bolted, limping but determined, straight into the trees. "Axel!" David hissed, reaching after him. Luke grabbed his arm. "No, he's leading us to something." Moments later, they reached the rise where the dog had stopped. There, half buried in snow, lay a duffel bag, torn open by claws. Inside, maps, SIM cards, a fake police ID, and a small memory drive sealed in plastic. David's heart pounded. "That's it. That's my proof." Luke's eyes widened. "You hid it here?" "I never had the chance to retrieve it. I thought it was gone." Evelyn crouched beside them, pulling out a small blinking object stuck to the lining. Her face went cold. "Tracking device. They know we're here." Luke snatched it up, crushed it under his boot. "Then we move, now." They fled back through the snow as the shouts began below. Angry, distant, the rising. The forest swallowed them, white and merciless. By the time they reached the upper ridge, the valley behind was alive with motion. Trucks revving, men scattering, gunfire cracking through the stillness. Axel stayed close, panting, his eyes bright with exhaustion and pride. Luke turned, scanning the chaos below, then faced the others. "They won't stop until they have that drive." David gripped the small plastic bag tight. "Then we'll make sure they never do." The storm returned with sudden force, covering their tracks in minutes. In that brief reprieve of snow and breath, the hunted became the hunters. The ridge above Pine Valley was a cathedral of ice and silence. Snow fell in long, deliberate sheets that turned every sound into memory. Footsteps swallowed before they could echo, breath vanishing into the pale. Luke Warren led the small group through the drifts, each step chosen with the precision of a soldier and the faith of a man who'd run out of other options. Behind him, Evelyn Moore carried the pack that held the salvaged evidence, her eyes scanning every tree line for movement. David Hale limped beside Axel, whose paw still bore the bandage from that first night, but whose spirit burned as if no wound had ever existed. The German shepherd's coat was dusted with frost, his ears pitched forward, each inhale sharp and careful. He was alive in the way warriors are alive, by refusing not to be. The storm eased by midday. When the snowlight thinned, Luke stopped near a fallen spruce and raised a hand for silence. "We camp here," he said. "They'll be searching the valley first. Once dark hits, we move. David dropped onto a log, his breath coming hard. The side of his jacket was dark with blood seeping through the bandage. They'll track us fast. Cole's men know these mountains. Luke knelt to check the wound. So do I. Evelyn crouched beside them, her face drawn but steady. There's a ranger trail 2 miles east. Leads to the old service depot near the rail yard. It's abandoned now, but it's got power if the lines are still live. We can use it to contact the FBI. David's brow furrowed. I thought that place was condemned. It is, Evelyn said, giving a thin smile, which means no one will look there first. Axel stirred suddenly, nose to the wind. His tail stiffened, his body locked in alert. Luke read the signal instantly. Movement. They flattened against the snowbank as a drone passed overhead, small, silent, its lights muted. The faint hum cut through the cold like a razor. Evelyn's hand found Luke's arm. If that's theirs, it is, Luke said. They're sweeping thermal. Stay low. The drone circled once, twice, then veered west toward the valley. When the sound finally faded, they exhaled as one. David managed a grim smile. Guess the storm's doing us a favor. Luke nodded. For now. He looked toward Axel, whose tail brushed the snow once. Acknowledgement. You're our early warning, partner. Don't let me down. When darkness came, it came fast. The clouds swallowed the last hint of blue, and the forest turned to a single shade of night. They moved by instinct and dim moonlight, following Evelyn's memory of the ranger trail. The path wound between pines, crossed a frozen creek, and then opened onto a narrow gorge where the remnants of an old supply bridge lay half buried in ice. Axel paused at the edge, sniffing the air, then growled low. What is it? Evelyn whispered. Explosives, Luke said, already scanning. Trip mines, probably new. They've trapped the crossing. David frowned. They're hurting us, want us boxed in. Luke's mind was already spinning, building maps the way soldiers do when the world becomes a chessboard. There's another way, he said. We use the gorge. The ice will hold if we move slow. Evelyn's eyes widened. That's suicide. He gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. Only if we're wrong. They slid down the embankment, the ice groaning underfoot like an old door. Axel led the way, weight low, every step deliberate. The sound of cracking somewhere beneath them drew a curse from David, but the ice held. By the time they climbed the far side, moonlight had broken through the clouds. Across the ridge, faint orange glows moved like fireflies, headlamps of men searching the valley below. They're close, Evelyn whispered. Closer than that, Luke murmured. He pointed to a shape half hidden near the tree line, a man kneeling, rifle slung. Another shadow moved behind him. Scouts! David's pulse kicked. If they've got comms, they'll have backup in minutes, Luke finished. We need to end it quietly. He unslung his rifle, adjusted the scope. 1 breath, 2. The first shot broke the night like a sentence finishing itself. The second shadow dropped before it could cry out. Evelyn flinched but said nothing. Luke's expression didn't change. There was no pride in the act, only precision. David looked at him, a flicker of respect behind the pain. You still shoot like you're on deployment. Luke reloaded without looking up. No such thing as was for men like me. They pressed on until the trees thinned and the outlines of Pine Valley's old rail yard appeared below, a skeleton of rusted tracks and corrugated hangars, one of which still bore the faded logo of the logging company that had abandoned it years before. Evelyn knelt to study the ground through her binoculars. 3 trucks, she said, 2 guards, and there, she pointed, a row of small figures near the loading bay. David squinted. Kids! Evelyn's voice trembled. They're using children to move the cargo. The weight of it fell over them like a second night. Luke's jaw tightened. Then we end this tonight. He turned to David. You still have that FBI contact? Marcus Darnell, David said, pulling a battered satellite phone from the pack. We worked a trafficking case together 2 years ago. He's clean. Luke nodded. Call him. Tell him to bring a team in silent. David keyed in the number with stiff fingers. Static filled the cold air, then a voice came through, muffled but clear. Darnell. It's Hale, David said quickly. I'm alive. Listen carefully. I have evidence on Black Talons. We're at Pine Valley Rail. They're here now, armed, moving kids as couriers. The line went silent for a heartbeat. Then, copy that. Sit tight, I'm mobilizing. ETA 24 hours. Can you hold? Luke answered for him. We'll hold. When the call ended, Evelyn stared at Luke. They'll attack before dawn. He gave a faint nod. Then we make it cost them. They spent the next hours turning the broken yard into a trap. Luke rigged flares from old fuel canisters, strung wire alarms across the main gate. Evelyn positioned herself in the old watchtower, rifle at the ready, while David checked the generator. They needed power for when the FBI arrived. Axel stayed near Luke, tail still, eyes scanning. Around midnight, the snow began again, slow and secret. It came with a strange quiet, the kind that feels like prayer. Then Axel's ears twitched. He growled once, low. Luke looked up. They're here. From the south road came the hum of engines, the crunch of tires on ice. Figures spilled from the trucks, armed men in black coats, flashlights sweeping. At their center, a tall figure stepped forward, face hidden under a hooded jacket, but voice unmistakable. Luke Warren, Richard Cole called, his tone almost pleasant. And Officer Hale, you made me work for this. David's face hardened. You betrayed us. Cole's laugh cut through the snow. I served a system that eats its own. I just learned to eat first. Luke raised his rifle. That meal's over. The firefight began like a storm breaking glass. Bullets snapped through the air. Flares ignited the snowfield in red light. Evelyn's first shot took down a man near the gate. Luke moved between cover, his movements practiced and efficient. David fired from behind a rail car, Axel darting ahead, barking warnings as muzzle flashes erupted around them. A grenade rolled across the ice near Luke's feet. He caught it in a motion that felt older than thought and hurled it back. The explosion tore a crater where the enemy had been advancing. For a brief, impossible moment, everything went still, but for the echo of Axel's barking and the hiss of dying snow. When the smoke cleared, Cole was gone. The survivors had fled. In the distance, faint sirens began to rise, FBI vehicles pushing through the mountains. Luke stood breathing hard, gun lowered, the snow around him glowing faintly red. David limped over, blood on his sleeve, but eyes clear. They're finished. Not yet, Luke said, scanning the tracks. But we're close. Axel sat beside him, tail thumping once, a small defiance against the cold. The storm had broken again, light spilling through the clouds as if dawn had arrived early just to see who had survived. Luke looked at the horizon, then down at the dog beside him. Good work, soldier, he whispered, and for the first time in years, his voice carried something other than loneliness. It carried purpose. The night after the firefight, the mountains of Pine Valley seemed to breathe again, long, slow, cautious breaths, as if the earth itself was waiting for the next move. Smoke still drifted from the shattered rail yard below, curling around broken machinery and twisted metal. The air smelled of gunpowder and cold iron. Snowflakes settled gently on the burned crates, covering the sins of men with the patience of heaven. Luke Warren stood at the edge of the ridge, the wind tugging at his coat. He hadn't slept, not since the gunfire. His rifle hung loosely in his hand, but his mind stayed sharp, tracing every sound in the dark. Behind him, in the dim shelter of an old supply shed, David Hale sat against the wall, his side bandaged anew. The fight had reopened his wound, yet he bore it with the stubborn pride of a man who refused to collapse while justice was unfinished. Axel lay beside him, head resting on David's boot, eyes half open but alert. His left flank bore a new scar, shallow but fresh, a souvenir from the chaos. Every now and then, his ears twitched toward the door, as if expecting trouble to knock again. Evelyn Moore, her hair loose from the night's wind, was pacing a short distance away, speaking into the battered satellite radio. Yes, Special Agent Darnell, they're here. 3 trucks, multiple hostiles down. We've got injured. Copy? Copy that. We'll light a flare at the north entrance. She turned off the radio, her fingers trembling slightly. They'll be here in 20 minutes. Luke gave a short nod, eyes never leaving the valley. 20 minutes is long enough for hell to visit twice. She frowned. You really think they'll try again? Cole's men scattered. Luke's tone was dry. Scattered isn't dead. And he was right. Down below, in the tangle of wrecked vehicles, something moved. a flicker of motion that didn't belong to firelight or wind. A figure was crawling from beneath a crushed crate, dragging one leg uselessly behind him. Richard Cole. His once pristine jacket was shredded, his face streaked with soot and blood, but the fury in his eyes burned unbroken. He pulled a pistol from the snow, chambered around, and stared up the ridge toward the faint silhouette of Luke and his group. David saw him first. "Cole's alive," Luke exhaled slowly. "I was afraid of that." Evelyn tensed. "The FBI's almost here." Luke shook his head. "He'll never surrender. A man like Cole only knows how to finish a fight." The snow whispered as Cole began climbing the slope, one slow, murderous step at a time. 15 minutes later, the wind shifted east, carrying with it the distant thrum of helicopter blades, Darnell's team approaching, but Luke barely heard them. His focus was fixed on the trail below, where footprints in the snow told a story written in rage. He raised his rifle, but didn't fire. Not yet. Behind him, David struggled to his feet. "Let me do it," he said hoarsely. "It's my case, my betrayal." "You can't stand straight," Luke replied. "Doesn't matter." David looked at him with hollow eyes. "He destroyed everything, my badge, my name, my partner's life. He left me in that forest to die." Luke hesitated. He understood revenge. It was a language soldiers learned too well, but he also knew it never spoke forgiveness. "You shoot him," Luke said softly. "You'll never stop hearing the echo." "I already do," David whispered. Evelyn stepped between them, voice firm but kind. "No one's shooting anyone until Darnell gets here." Her words hung in the cold air like the last thin branch of reason, until Axel suddenly rose, growling deep in his chest. Luke followed the dog's gaze. "Down!" The gunshot cracked from the darkness, splintering the wooden beam inches above Evelyn's head. Cole had made it halfway up the ridge, braced against a boulder, pistol steady. Luke fired back, forcing Cole to duck. Snow exploded around them. The sound rolled through the valley like thunder, and the distant helicopters veered closer. Evelyn grabbed David, dragging him behind a rock. Luke moved forward, weaving between trees. He could feel Axel's presence beside him, that silent, loyal rhythm of paw steps keeping pace. When the next shot came, it wasn't aimed at Luke. It hit Axel. The dog yelped, stumbled, but didn't fall. He turned toward the sound of the gunfire, eyes burning, teeth bared, still ready to protect. Luke's heart clenched, a soldier's heart that had buried too many comrades. "Stay, boy," he said through his teeth, but Axel ignored him, lunging toward the shooter's shadow. Cole's silhouette rose in the snow, gun ready, when Axel struck. The two crashed into the drift, the gun firing once more, wide. Cole cursed, slamming the butt of the pistol into the dog's side. Luke sprinted forward, closing the distance in seconds. He hit Cole like a storm, the two men rolling down the slope, fists and snow and fury blurring together. "You left a man and his dog to die," Luke growled, pinning him. "Now it's your turn to feel the cold." Cole spat blood, grinning through broken teeth. "You think killing me changes anything? There's always another buyer, another uniform." Luke's grip tightened, but before he could respond, headlights cut through the trees, black SUVs tearing across the ridge. Men in tactical gear poured out, shouting, weapons raised. "FBI, drop it!" Cole laughed. "Told you." Luke looked up, his weapon still in hand, the chaos around him frozen in red and blue light. Special Agent Marcus Darnell stepped from the lead vehicle, his face grim. "Luke Warren?" "Yeah." "Step back." Luke obeyed, lifting his hands slowly. Two agents rushed forward, disarming Cole, forcing him onto his knees. The ex-cop sneered. "You're late." Darnell didn't answer. He turned to Luke, eyes flicking to David, then to Evelyn. "You three are lucky. We intercepted Cole's backup on the Western Trail. Without you, they would have vanished by morning." David leaned against a tree, exhaustion catching up. "Then let's end it now." Darnell nodded to his team. "Secure the site. Get the kids to Medivac." The agents moved quickly, their orders carving the chaos into order. Cole was cuffed and dragged toward the SUVs, still smirking. "You think prison scares me?" he hissed. "You'll all drown in your own truth." Luke didn't respond. He was kneeling beside Axel, checking the wound. The bullet had grazed the shoulder, bleeding but not fatal. You're too stubborn to quit, aren't you? Axel licked his wrist, tail tapping weakly against the snow. Evelyn crouched beside them, her eyes bright with relief. He saved your life. Luke smiled faintly. Guess we're even now. David limped closer, one hand pressed to his ribs. You think they'll really stop? The Talons? Luke glanced toward the valley, where dawn was breaking, pale gold over the wreckage. Men like Cole fall, but the world keeps building new devils. He looked back at David. What matters is that good men keep standing. Darnell approached, handing David a sealed evidence bag, the memory drive Axel had led them to. We'll need your full statement, Officer Hale, but with this, he patted the drive. We've got enough to bury them. David took it, his hand trembling slightly. Then maybe it's finally over. No, Luke said quietly. It's beginning. For a moment, the wind fell still. The sun crested the peaks, bathing the snow in light that looked almost holy. The rail yard, the broken crates, the scars on their faces, all of it shimmered beneath that fragile, forgiving glow. Luke turned away, heading toward the edge of the ridge where his cabin once stood miles away, now only ashes beneath snow. Evelyn joined him, her hand brushing his sleeve. You could stay, she said softly. Pine Haven needs someone like you, someone who doesn't give up. Luke looked at her, really looked, and something in his eyes softened. Maybe, he said, after the storm passes. Axel barked once, as if agreeing. The helicopters began to lift, scattering snow into silver halos around them. As they rose, David looked back at the valley one last time. Sometimes, he murmured, God doesn't calm the storm. Evelyn smiled faintly. No, sometimes he sends people who can walk through it. Luke stood with them, watching the light climb higher, the sound of the rotors fading into the endless white. The storm had ended. What remained was faith, not loud, not certain, but alive. The first light of dawn spread over Pine Valley like a whispered apology from the heavens. The mountains, once gray and cruel, now glowed with pale gold. Their frozen peaks softened under the forgiving hand of morning. The storm had passed, not quietly, not without scars, but it had passed. And for the first time in years, Luke Warren allowed himself to believe in something resembling peace. The rail yard behind them was now a cordoned-off crime scene. FBI agents in dark jackets moved through the snow like black birds among ashes. Cameras flashed, voices murmured into radios, and the air smelled faintly of diesel, gun oil, and the end of chaos. David Hale sat on the back bumper of an FBI truck, an oxygen mask slung around his neck, a blanket draped over his shoulders. His face was pale but steady, the look of a man who'd seen the edge and walked back with purpose. Beside him lay Axel, wrapped in a thermal sheet. The German shepherd's eyes were closed, chest rising slow but sure. His fur had been cleaned of blood, his bandaged shoulder hidden beneath a blue service vest that Darnell's team had found in one of the trucks. The very vest Axel had been stripped of when captured. Seeing it on him again felt like restoration, like something the world owed him finally returned. Evelyn Moore stood a few feet away, hands in her coat pockets, watching the horizon. Her hair lifted slightly in the wind, and her eyes reflected the mountains, strong, clear, touched with melancholy. She had helped lead the rescued children to the evac chopper earlier that morning. Now she stood silent, letting the sound of the valley fill the space where fear used to live. Luke walked toward them, his boots crunching through the thin crust of ice. He looked different now, not in shape or age, those remained the same, but in bearing. Something had loosened in his posture, a quietness replacing the relentless tension that used to sit between his shoulders. His eyes, though still sharp, carried the faint shimmer of gratitude, the kind that comes only after surviving the impossible. Axel's holding on, he said, sitting beside David. David gave a tired smile. You know, he's tougher than both of us combined. Wouldn't argue that, Luke replied. I've seen Marines with less grit. They sat in silence for a while, watching the snow melt slowly on the asphalt. The world felt heavy and light all at once, the kind of contradiction that only comes after victory. After a long pause, David spoke again, his voice low. Darnell told me they've cleared my name. The Bureau confirmed everything on the drive. Cole's entire operation is gone. Seized, documented, done. Luke nodded. Good. But David's eyes didn't quite match his tone of relief. Doesn't feel like justice yet. Maybe it never does. Justice isn't about feeling, Luke said quietly. It's about finishing what others were too scared to start. David chuckled dryly. You sound like my old academy instructor. I've been called worse. Evelyn turned toward them then, the soft crunch of her boots breaking the silence. You two look like you're trying to outbrute each other. Luke smirked. I was winning until you walked up. Please, she said, arching an eyebrow. You look like a man trying to decide if the piece is edible. That earned the faintest laugh from him, a sound so rare that David glanced up just to be sure he'd heard it right. Evelyn's tone softened. They're taking the kids to Billings Medical Center. Most of them are malnourished, but alive. The youngest one, a little girl named Ruth, asked if she could thank the dog who saved the angels. She nodded toward Axel. David blinked hard. He'd appreciate that. He'll get his medal, Darnell's voice cut in from behind them. The agent approached, clipboard in hand, his expression a mix of fatigue and respect. And both of you, commendations, reinstatements, witness protection if you want it. He paused, looking between them. You've done something remarkable here. You didn't just take down a trafficking ring. You saved lives, restored trust in this department. That's no small thing. David shook his head. We didn't do it alone. He glanced at Luke and Evelyn. We just walked through the storm together. Darnell nodded, writing something on his form. Still, that's how change begins, one storm at a time. He turned to leave, then stopped. Oh, and Luke, the Bureau's rebuilding a regional field shelter for canines up in Pine Haven. They're naming it after Axel. Thought you'd like to know. Luke looked down at the sleeping dog, a faint smile touching the corner of his mouth. Yeah, he said softly. That sounds right. Later that afternoon, the choppers were gone, the agents gone, and the valley once again belonged to the mountains. Evelyn walked with Luke and David up the ridge road toward where Luke's cabin had once stood. All that remained were blackened beams poking through the snow, smoke curling lazily from the ruins like memories that refused to leave. Luke stopped, taking it in without a word. The cabin had been his solitude, his exile, his confession booth. Seeing it gone didn't sting the way he expected. If anything, it felt freeing. You could rebuild, Evelyn said softly. He nodded. Maybe, or maybe some places are meant to stay burned, to remind us what we walked through. David set a hand on his shoulder. You saved my life. You saved theirs. If anyone deserves peace, it's you. Luke smiled faintly, but his gaze drifted to Axel, who had limped to the center of the clearing and lay down where the old porch used to be. The wind played through the trees, and for a heartbeat, the sound almost resembled laughter. Peace isn't something you deserve, Luke said quietly. It's something you build, like trust, brick by brick. Evelyn tilted her head. So, what's next for you, builder of peace? He chuckled. Haven't decided. I'm better at surviving than planning. Well, she said, if you get tired of surviving alone, Pine Haven Rescue Center always needs hands. We're opening in spring. Luke looked at her then. Really looked. You're serious? Completely, she said with a grin. Someone has to train the next generation of miracle workers, and I hear you're good with stubborn souls. David laughed softly. That's one way to put it. Luke reached down, running his hand over Axel's head. What do you think, partner? Ready to trade snow for a kennel full of rookies? Axel thumped his tail, eyes half-lidded but content. That's a yes, Evelyn said. Luke straightened, the wind tugging at his coat again. He looked toward the horizon, where the last shards of sunlight burned through a veil of mist, turning the snow to liquid gold. Then, I guess we start fresh. That evening, as dusk settled, the three of them stood on the porch of a newly built ranger cabin a few miles away, temporary housing while the rescue center was being set up. The valley stretched below them, serene and endless, the scars of the past fading beneath a rising moon. David had decided to stay for the time being, helping the Bureau with final reports before returning to active duty. Evelyn was already drafting plans for the center, her desk scattered with sketches and funding notes. Luke, for once, felt no need to run. He sat on the steps, watching Axel doze near the fire pit, his nose twitching in dreams. The air was cold but gentle, filled with the faint scent of pine and smoke. Evelyn came out, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She handed him one. You ever think about how strange it is? How pain and grace can happen in the same place? Luke took a sip, the heat steady in his chest. All the time, she smiled. Then you know what I mean when I say this valley isn't cursed. It's blessed. It just hides it well. He looked at her, the corners of his mouth curving upward. Maybe that's why I belong here. And when the first star appeared over Pine Valley, its light falling on the ruins, the river, the resting dog, and the 3 weary souls who'd saved each other, Luke felt something he hadn't in years. Not redemption, not pride, just grace. Quiet, undeserved, but real. Somewhere deep in the woods, a wolf howled, low and mournful, and Axel lifted his head, answering softly as if to say, "We're home now." Sometimes God does not calm the storm. Instead, he sends someone, or something, to walk through it with us. Just like Luke, David, Evelyn, and Axel, we all face moments when life feels cold, uncertain, and buried beneath fear. But even in those frozen places, God's grace is still working, shaping courage out of pain and light out of darkness. Maybe the miracle you are waiting for is already beside you, a loyal friend, a helping hand, or a quiet strength you did not know you had. Let this story remind us that faith still moves in small, beautiful ways, even when the world feels silent. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us where you are watching from, and if you believe in God's quiet miracles, type Amen in the comments. May the Lord bless you and your family with peace, protection, and love. And do not forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories of faith and courage.